Hey, I am so glad that you're here today. Listen, I got to tell you, it's been a great morning, and I'm so excited for the series we're starting today. We wrote this series months ago, and if I'm honest with you, like what we've done for the last couple of months has been good, but I've just been counting down to this, okay? Because here's what's going on. This series we're starting today is our Easter series. It's going to be so good for the next few weeks. And I'll just tell you, so the series is called Sunday is Coming, okay? And here's the idea of the whole series. It's that some of us are living in a Saturday, okay? See, for Jesus followers, they had hung all of their hopes and dreams, their futures, everything was at stake. They put it all on this man, Jesus, and they followed him and they gave up everything. They left it all behind. They put everything on him. And then one Friday, he was pinned to a cross and he was killed, and that seemed like the end. And so Friday was full of this heartbreak and this disappointment and this tragedy. And then Saturday, I think they must have just stood around shocked going, what did we do? We didn't see that coming, right? Some of you are in a Saturday season today in your life. You're in the wake of heartbreak or the midst of pain, or you're trying to pick up the pieces and put things back together, and you don't know if there's hope for you. And what I want to tell you today is hold on, because your Sunday is coming. And Jesus is not done with you yet. Okay, we say this all the time around here, the best is yet to come. That's because I believe exactly what Romans says, exactly what Seth said a minute ago, that God is always at work. And he is always working for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. So what that means is if you will put your faith in Jesus and you'll trust in him, he has not given up on you yet. So don't give up. Sunday's coming. That's the message of Easter. And that's this whole series. We're going to look every week at the story of somebody who's living in a Saturday. They thought tragedy or crisis or pain was going to be the rest for them, the end for them, right? And then they had this interaction or this encounter with Jesus. They bump into him and he changes everything. And I believe you are not here on accident, because if you are in a place in your life where you are desperate, you are hoping, you are praying, you're begging for that encounter with Jesus, and you've been waiting and it hasn't happened yet, I believe that God wants to have that encounter with you. And I believe he wants to hear you say, hey, hold on, because Sunday is coming. And today we're going to look at a story of a guy who experienced just that in Luke chapter 7. If you have a Bible with you, open up with me to Luke chapter 7. An incredible story of a guy who did something really, really impressive. Really, I would even use the word amazing, right in the midst of a situation that was really painful. So let me just kind of set the table with this, okay? I don't know if you know the feeling of not belonging somewhere. I bet you do. I do. I've felt that way off and on through my life. One instance, for example, that immediately comes to mind is last year I spent a week in the mountains in Honduras at a school called Jardín de Gracia that's one of our mission partners. And I'm hanging out with all these elementary school kids who speak next to no English. It's all Spanish. And then I'm there. I speak, the only Spanish I know is on the menu at El Campesinos, okay? I don't know any Spanish, and so the language barrier was steep, and I just felt like a fish out of water. I mean, through the week, I came to love those kids, and I think they loved me. They laughed at us a lot, so maybe they just thought we were goofy, but it was great. But man, I felt like a fish out of water, and I'll bet you know that feeling too. In fact, I'll bet you that somebody feels that way right now because you don't consider yourself a church person, and you're not even sure what you're doing here, but you're like, dude, I've never felt more out of my element than I do right now, because this is not my scene, right? If you're here and you're thinking that, or you're watching online and you're thinking that, I know how you feel, okay? Maybe the only reason you're here is because your girlfriend said, hey, church is a thing I do, and if you want this to be a thing, this is gonna be your thing. And so you said, okay, and you've been thinking all week the building was gonna collapse when you walked through the door, but there was no thunder or lightning, so you got nothing to worry about, okay? It's all good. If you feel out of place today, I want you to know, I just want to say this, okay? If you feel like you don't belong here, like you feel like you're not a church person and this is not your scene, then what I want to say to you, if you're uncomfortable today, is welcome home. because this is a church where you can belong. You can be yourself. You can be at home, because here's what we want to do. We want to walk with you while you figure things out with Jesus. And he'll do work on, the stuff in your life that you feel like maybe you need to sort out or change between you and him. You'll work that out, but we're all doing that. And so we want to walk with you in that. And this is a church where you can do that, and it's safe here, and you can ask questions here, and you can be honest and say, I don't get it all. I don't understand everything. Listen, maybe you think like, I don't know why I'm here because I don't have everything together. And we would just say, hey, neither do we. That's why we're here. And that's kind of the story that we're going to look at today. It's a story of an outsider. See, Jesus, the thing we learn about him as we read his word is people who were nothing like Jesus liked Jesus. They were drawn to him. People who were nothing like him. We're talking like prostitutes and tax collectors and foreigners and sick people and sinners. These people that it made no sense that Jesus would hang out with them. They were drawn to him, and he was drawn to them. Men, women, children, everybody, they liked Jesus. People who were not comfortable in religious circles liked Jesus. In fact, some of the people who were most comfortable around Jesus were people who were very uncomfortable in the church of their day, which they called a synagogue. They were totally uncomfortable in that circle. And I want to tell you this story from the Gospel of Luke about a guy who understands what it's like to be outside his comfort zone, fish out of water in a very tough situation. And we'll look at what Jesus did in his life. So have Luke chapter 7 open. Now let me explain really quickly. If you're new to all this, if you're new to church, you're new to the Bible, you're new to God, let me kind of set the table this way, because this will help you understand Luke's context here, all right? The Bible is not a book, okay? The Bible is like a small library of all these ancient books and manuscripts and letters and documents that were written by between 35 and 40 authors over a period of a few thousand years. And eventually 66 of those documents were compiled into a little library that we call the Bible. And it's split in two sections. You have the Old Testament that tells the story of God's people from creation leading all the way up to almost Jesus' birth. And then the New Testament picks up with the birth of Jesus and tells the story of his life and his ministry and his miracles and his teachings, follows all the way through to the beginning of the church. And then there's all these letters that were written to encourage people to be strong in their faith in a world where following Jesus was really, really hard. And Luke is in the second half of the Bible in the New Testament. It starts with 4 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These are biographies that were written by the guys that they're named for, but they were written about Jesus. We call them Gospels. They tell the story again of Jesus' life, and we're going to look at the third one. But the thing that makes Luke unique, and the reason I tell you all this is, out of all those books, out of all those authors, out of everything in the Bible, Luke is the only author who wasn't Jewish. He was the only author who wasn't one of the people of God, right? So he's got like this outsider's mindset. He understands that he's kind of a unicorn here. And you even see this come through in his writing, because Luke loves to tell stories of people who were also outsiders, just like the story we're going to look at today. Because at first glance, you read this story and you think, man, this guy did not belong. But what you're going to find as we go through this story is this is exactly the kind of guy that Jesus loved to hang out with. So here we go. Luke chapter 7, we'll start in verse 1. It says this: when Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, so he's teaching them, right? Then he enters a town called Capernaum. Now, Capernaum in Jesus' day was a small village of about 2,000 people, real small town right on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Today, it's an archaeological site. You can go there and you can see Capernaum. In fact, we'll show you a couple of pictures of it. This is what it looks like today from above. And as you walk through the streets of Capernaum, you kind of get a feel for what life might have been like. You kind of get to look into the ruins of people's homes and other buildings that are there in the town. Wasn't a big place, but it was a hub, kind of like a central hub for these other villages that were around. And Jesus made it a hub for his own ministry right here in Capernaum. Kind of became a central spot for him, like a home base. So he goes into Capernaum. Verse 2 says, there a centurion's servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. Now, Luke's a doctor. He's a physician. And so when he says this servant's about to die, Luke would know, okay? He can verify that. So this is a serious situation. We don't know what the sickness was. We just know it's life and death. It's really bad. Now, something we need to take note of here before we go any further is it might seem weird to you that this centurion, powerful military guy, is this concerned about one of his servants. So you don't maybe often hear or think of a master being this concerned about a servant, right? But in Jesus' day, it was actually pretty common for a master to adopt a servant that he considered highly valued or highly loved. And they'd almost become like surrogate sons or daughters to the master. And so when he's talking about this servant, you got to understand, it's almost like he's talking about one of his kids. So he's this tough guy, he's a military guy, you know, he's rough and gruff and big and strong, but man, when his son gets really, really sick, something inside of him, he has a soft spot for this one. He says, I gotta go get help. And it's interesting where he goes to get help, okay? He's a Roman soldier. And in Rome, they either worshiped a whole bunch of false gods or no gods at all. And so the fact that this guy would say, hey, I need help, I gotta go to Jesus, is pretty crazy. And we're gonna unpack why he did that here in just a little bit. But he knows to get to Jesus, he's gotta go through the Jewish religious leaders. And so here's what he does next in verse 3. It says, the centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. So let me paint a little clearer picture for you here, okay? First of all, you need to know what a centurion was in Jesus' day. Again, a commander in the Roman military. A centurion led about 100 soldiers. That's what the name would suggest, you know, centurion. So powerful guy. And centurions were natural leaders. They were good leaders. Centurions, they had risen through the ranks, okay? When you were in Jesus' day, if you were in the military, if you wanted to be an officer, you had to be born to a high-class, high-power, influential family. If you were a commoner and you entered the military, the highest rank you could achieve was centurion. It's kind of the equivalent of a lieutenant in the American military today. So these guys had started at the bottom and risen through the ranks, and they understood how to lead the men under their command because they had literally walked in their sandals, but they understood how to influence and communicate with the leaders above them. So they're good leaders, they're strong, they're the backbone of the Roman military. So this guy, he goes to the Jewish leaders and asks them to go to Jesus and get help. But this is a risky proposition because if you were a Roman man or woman, or particularly Roman military, and you were anywhere near a Jewish village, you were always in danger. You were always looking over your shoulder because you were an outsider. And more than that, you were hated. You were hated. You would have considered yourself as a Roman military man a peacekeeper, but they would have considered you an invader. You were an occupier. You were in their territory. And so this is a dangerous thing, a dangerous situation for them. There's only 100 or so of them, and they're in a village of 2,000 people, and they're surrounded by other villages. There are tens of thousands of Jewish people. It was really dangerous, right? And so this centurion is a smart guy. He decides, I'm gonna do some nice things for them. I'm gonna try to earn some good graces here. We're gonna help them out. And we know this is true because of what happens as he asks these Jewish leaders to go to Jesus and ask for some help. And not only do they honor his request, but they have some really surprising things to say. Let's keep reading. It says, when they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, this man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and he built our synagogue. A couple interesting things here. It says they earnestly pleaded for him. In other words, they weren't doing this out of obligation. They didn't feel threatened by him. They were genuinely going to Jesus and saying, hey, we think you should help this guy. Why? Because he loves our nation? I mean, the Jews thought the Romans hated him. Okay, and so for them to say this guy who we should view as an occupier, and he loves us. He even built our church. He doesn't even believe in our God, but he built our church. This is crazy. See, the Romans are in Capernaum to keep peace, but Capernaum is a pretty peaceful town, and so they don't have a whole lot to do. And so instead of sitting around the barracks all the time bored, he puts his men to work. They start laying brick and mortar and helping improve the town. And even to the point of this guy probably invested a lot of his own money to build their synagogue. And so that's a huge favor to the Jewish people. And because he did this for them, they love him for it. They view him almost as one of their own. Now, last year, I actually got to visit this synagogue, and it's pretty cool. It's what you see today when you walk through it is a 5th century synagogue. but it's built on the foundations of the first century synagogue. It's like right on the same spot. So if you walk around to the side of this synagogue and the ruins that are left of it, you can actually see, we had a picture, but I don't know if it must not be working up there. There it is. Those white stones on top are the 5th century synagogue, but that layer of darker stone underneath is the foundation that this centurion and his men laid in Jesus' day. And you can go there today and you can touch it for yourself. You can see it. You can connect to history that way. I want to mention really quickly before we go on that if you'd like to do that, you have an opportunity. Next March 13th to 21st, a couple of us from FCC are going to lead a Holy Land trip, and you're invited. So we have about 40 open spots. And we would love to take you. If you'd love to go, you get to see Capernaum, you get to walk around, you can go right there where that picture was, get to see that. You go to Bethlehem and Jerusalem and Nazareth and all these different places where Jesus' ministry took place. So if you want more information, 2 ways you can get it. Next Sunday morning at 10:15 and 12:15, so immediately following both services, we're gonna have an informational meeting next door at the CLC in the auditorium, so you can go get some info, or you can go to firstchristian.com/holyland, and all the details are right there. So love to take you. It's gonna be amazing. So bookmark that if you're interested. So anyway, the centurion and his men, they build this synagogue, right? And he's actually loved by the people who really by all religious and cultural standards should hate him. They should view him as somebody who's an enemy. But on his behalf, they go to Jesus and they say, hey, please help this guy. So verses 6 and 7 tell us what happened. It says, so Jesus went with them. He's gonna go to this Roman centurion's house and he's gonna heal his servant, his son. Now he was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That's why I didn't even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. Say the word. Okay, this guy, he understands what it is to give orders. He's a commander of a lot of men. He understands what it means to say something and have it happen. But what he's suggesting here is that Jesus has this ability to command like supernatural things to happen. He's suggesting that he believes that Jesus can just tell his servant to just be healthy, right? Where would a pagan Roman military guy get this idea that this Jewish religious leader has that kind of power, that kind of authority that he can just say, hey, get better, and you get better, right? Where would that come from? Well, to answer that for you, I have to tell you another story. This is a story about another guy from Capernaum, but this doesn't take place in Capernaum. It actually takes place in a town called Cana, which was about 13 miles away up in the hills. One day, this businessman from Capernaum travels to Cana. You might remember Cana is the place where Jesus performed his very first miracle, turning water into wine at a wedding. It's that town, okay? So this businessman travels up there into the hills, 13 miles from home in Capernaum. And when he gets there, he finds out Jesus is there. And this is really good news for him because his son back in Capernaum is sick. And just like the centurion servant, his son is not doing well. It's pretty critical. And so he hears Jesus is in town. He goes, he searches him out, and he says, Jesus, I'm so glad you're here because my son is sick. We don't know what else to do. We've tried everything, and he's not getting better, and he's going to die. But I believe that you can heal him. So Jesus, will you come with me? Let's go back to Capernaum. It's only 13 miles. It'll take a day or two, but we can get there so fast. Jesus, will you come with me? Because I believe that if you come to my house, you can touch my son, and he'll be healed. I believe you can do that, which, let's be honest, this is a pretty impressive profession of faith in Jesus, right? To say my son is sick. I mean, I think about our kids, right? If one of them were sick, Ashley and I, we have 4 kids. If one of them were sick, I would do anything. I would search out any doctor. I'd try anything, right? Just make my kid better. So for this man to say, Jesus, I believe you can do this. This is impressive. And so he says, Jesus, if you'll just come with me back to Capernaum, 13 miles. I believe you can make my son well, right? So what's Jesus do? Interesting. He scolds the man in front of everybody. Talk about kicking a guy when he's down, right? He scolds him. Why? Jesus says, look, dude, do you really think that I have to go with you? You don't believe that my power is good from 13 miles away? You think I have to travel with you home and I have to, what am I gonna do? Like tap your kid on the foot and get up and then he's good, right? You think I have to do that? You don't think that right here in Cana, I can just say, get better, and he gets better? Your faith is that weak? What Jesus is really doing here is he's scolding the entire audience. You see, they had heard of the time when he turned water into wine, and so this crowd is gathered around, but here's the thing. They weren't gathered around because they wanted Jesus. They just wanted him to do another trick. They didn't want the presence of Jesus. They were happy for the presence of Jesus so they could take advantage of the power of Jesus. So he scolds them for it. Now, I say this because if we're gonna be honest, haven't we all treated God that way at some point? I mean, how many of us at some point in our lives, it's like you're hoping for a job or a promotion at work. You're hoping the girl you ask to prom is gonna say yes. You're hoping that you're sick and you wanna get better. Or someone you love is sick, you want them to get better. A relationship's in trouble, a marriage is in trouble, you want breakthrough, right? So we go to God and we're like, okay, God, I'm gonna read my Bible a little more, look at me. And it's the King James Version, see, so it's more spiritual. Not the Message, leave that one alone. Okay, or we say, I'm gonna pray a little more. I don't normally pray this much, but God, I'm gonna pray a little more, right? And look, what we're doing is we're treating our faith like it's transactional. It's like I'm gonna input a little more and I'm gonna expect something back. That's what the people here were doing. And Jesus is like, why would you do that? I wanna ask you to do something, okay? You have to sort this out. I wanna ask you to consider this question. Very simple question, very profound answer. What do you want from Jesus? What do you want? Do you want an encounter with Jesus because there's something that you want or need or your heart is set on it? And so you're thinking, man, if I could just bump into Jesus, he can make this happen. And so you're doing everything you can to try to earn some favor, right? Or to create this moment of encounter. But it's not because you want the presence of Jesus. It's just because there's something you need. And so like this crowd or like this man, you're like, you think you are having faith, but really it's like your faith is so weak. Listen, here's what I know. I know that if you will seek God just for who he is, if you'll seek Jesus just for who he is, he will show up and he will prove he is so much more than you ever imagined he would be. And I know that because I've experienced it in my life. There have been whole seasons of my life where I've treated God like a vending machine. Like you put in a few extra prayers, or you put in a little more time reading the Bible, or you do enough, or you give enough, or you do whatever, and it's because you want something, right? And isn't it crazy how when the season comes up in our life where we have a need or a wish or a desire, all of a sudden we get a little more spiritual? I've done that. What I found is when I finally gave that up and I just started seeking God just for who he is, I just started seeking Jesus. I started seeking the presence of the Holy Spirit, not because I needed something, not because I wanted something, but I just wanted that presence. All of a sudden, he became so much more real to me. And that's when stuff in my life started to change. That's when my faith took root and it became more meaningful. It's not because I had this transactional faith. It's because I just wanted the presence of God. And so I want to ask you, what do you want from Jesus? Man, because if you will just go to him because you want his presence in your life, what you will find out, I promise you, is he is so much more than you expected. That's what this businessman in Cana found out. Remember, home is 13 miles away, and Jesus is like, I don't have to go to your house. He's like, dude, your son's better, go home, okay? So the next day, the businessman is traveling home, and as he's on the road back to Capernaum, his servants meet him halfway, and they say, you are not gonna believe this, but something crazy happened yesterday. Your son was laying there, we thought he was done, and then he just like sat up, and now he's playing Nintendo, he's good. Right? The man's like, when did this happen? And they said, well, yesterday, mid-afternoon, and it clicks in his mind. It's the exact moment that Jesus said he's gonna be better. And he has this realization, Jesus has the power to heal my son from 13 miles away. So he runs home and his son is good as new. Now, what's a dad do in a situation like that, right? You tell everybody. So he's running all around town like, you're not gonna believe this, but little Johnny, he was sick. We didn't think he was gonna make it, but then I saw Jesus up in Cana and he said he was gonna get better. And before I even got home, he was better. It's crazy. Come see for yourself. He's at home, he's playing in the yard. You gotta see this. Like, he's running all around town. He's telling everybody in this town of Capernaum, which is a small town of about 2,000 people, on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. Such a small town, in fact, that I guarantee you it would be impossible for this Roman centurion not to have heard what Jesus did from 13 miles away. And so, listen, he doesn't think, he doesn't believe, he knows. Jesus can make what's broken in my life whole again. And I want you to know today, guys, you can be sure that Jesus can make what is broken in your life whole again. He's proven it over and over and over. So this centurion sends some friends to meet Jesus on the road, and they say, Jesus, don't come to our house, okay? Don't come, don't trouble yourself with that, don't do that, okay? Here's what he says. He goes on in verse 8, he explains what's going on here when he says, don't come, don't trouble yourself. He says, for I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it. Jesus has never heard anything like this before, okay? And he's like trying to figure out, why wouldn't you want me to come to your home? I'm on my way. Well, the reason is because this centurion knows that if Jesus, this Jewish leader, crosses the threshold of his Roman home, Jesus is gonna have hell to pay with the Jewish leaders. And so he's like, when he says, Jesus, don't trouble yourself, he's not saying, Jesus, I know you're busy, don't bother. He's literally saying, Jesus, don't create trouble for yourself. Don't ruin your reputation. Don't compromise your ministry. I believe you have the power to just say the word. You don't have to be there. You can just speak it, right? And he explains, I understand. Jesus is blown away by this. And in verse 9, it says the most incredible thing, okay? It says, when Jesus heard this, he was what? He was amazed at him. When Jesus heard this guy saying this stuff, he was amazed at him. And turning to the crowd following him, he said, I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel. And then the men who'd been sent returned home and found the servant well. Here's what's amazing, okay? What's amazing is Jesus was amazed. Think about this. How would you amaze Jesus? Okay, let's say you're a swimmer and you're a really fast swimmer, okay? And so you're like, hey, Jesus, check out what I can do. I have this, you're gonna love this. This is gonna blow you away. And you dive in the water and you're swimming so fast, it's like faster than anybody's ever swam before. And you're thinking you're impressing Jesus and he's just walking on the water beside you like, yeah, that's really cool, keep going. It's really fast, you're doing great, right? You're like a singer and you're like, Jesus, I want to sing for you. You're going to love this. This song's just for you. And so you start singing and it's beautiful. And here's Jesus and he's surrounded by the angels in heaven. They're singing praise to him all day. And he's like, yeah, it's really good. Or like, do you think Jesus is up in heaven right now looking at me going, hey, Michael, Gabriel, you got to see this guy in Canton. He's preaching. He's crushing it. Of course not. Now, here's why I say that. I say that because your abilities and your talents and your generosity, all those things, man, those are things that you can use, and I think God wants you to, and I think he'll bless that, but you're not gonna amaze and impress him with those things. But you know what will amaze him? I don't think that he's looking at me on this stage or looking at you doing whatever you do, and I don't think he's amazed by what you can do, but he might be amazed today by what's happening in your heart or in your soul or in your spirit. Because here's the deal, okay? I said this before, so let me say this again. I know that some of you are in a Saturday. I know that some of you, man, life is falling apart around you right now. You got a diagnosis that you you don't even know how to process. Or a relationship ended and you don't know where to start to put your life back together on your own. Or one of your kids is just self-destructing and you don't know how to help and you want to and whatever. Or things at school with your friends, they're talking about you and you're feeling it and you feel like you don't even want to show your face. Or whatever, I could keep going. Or maybe it's this, okay, and this is the hardest one, so just process this with me. Maybe everything in your life is good, and you still can't figure out why your faith just seems dry. I'll bet some of you are there today. You've had no crisis. Everything's good, and you can't figure out why your faith just doesn't seem to be meaningful. Here's what I know. Okay, I know that if you're in one of those seasons, what will amaze Jesus, it really comes down to this. I want you to know this, first of all. Jesus sees your faith. Maybe it took every ounce of faith you could muster up just to get out of bed and be here today. Or just to click over online and watch this service. Maybe all you could do, maybe all you could scrape up was enough to do that. You don't even want to be here. Inside right now, you're processing this, and I'm like, you feel like I am punching you right in the gut because this is like you. This is your life. Maybe it's all you could muster just to be here. I want you to know that Jesus sees that faith, and that amazes him. See, I know this too. I know that when you act in faith, Jesus is amazed. He is amazed. I know that because we see it. We read the stories, right? Some of you are still wrestling. You're still struggling. You're going, I don't belong here. This isn't my scene. I don't belong with all these people who have it all together. But I want you to know we're here because we all need hope. And we all need grace, and we all need forgiveness, and we all need Jesus. Me and you. We are all in the same boat. We are here because we don't have it all together. But we're trying to figure it out. And we're doing it together. That's why we're here. Now, I want to fast forward to another centurion, okay? This guy shows up at the end of Jesus' life. So this guy he's a centurion in Jerusalem, and he is at the cross. He's overseeing the execution. This is the man who put the nails in Jesus' hands. This is the man who put the nail in Jesus' feet. This is the man who directed the men to stand the cross up and to pick it up and to drop it into a hole in the ground. And they pinned Jesus to a tree and they executed him. This is the guy, okay? Now, in all of Jerusalem, Pilate only had 600 Roman soldiers, and so there are 6 centurions in town. That means you can be sure that this guy was in the room when Jesus was put on trial unfairly. You can be sure that this guy was in the room when the Jewish religious leaders accused Jesus of all these crimes he didn't commit. You can be sure that this guy was in the room when Pilate gave Jesus a chance to speak up in his own defense and he was silent. You can be sure that this guy stood there as Jesus was mocked and beaten and abused and spit on and scorned and tortured and flogged and beat within an inch of his life. You can be sure that this guy was following Jesus through the streets of Jerusalem as he dragged the cross and as he was shamed and they made a mockery out of him and he dragged that cross to the spot, to the place of his own execution. You can be sure that this guy watched it all. Now, you can be sure that this guy was in the room when it was explained that the reason that the Jewish people wanted Jesus crucified was that he was a heretic because he claimed to be the Son of God. You can be sure that this guy was there, okay? And you need to know all that because this centurion had seen a lot of people put on trial. He'd seen a lot of people convicted to death, and he had seen a lot of people crucified. This was a common method of execution, but you got to understand, this was the nastiest, most degrading, most terrible form of torture and punishment and death that the Romans could dream up. It was so bad that a Roman citizen was not allowed to be crucified under law unless they were a traitor to the emperor. But this guy had seen a lot of non-Roman people crucified, right? He'd never seen anything like Jesus. They stand the cross up. You've got these thieves on his right and on his left, and these guys are cursing and complaining and shouting, and they're crying out, and Jesus is just silent. And then after a little while, the first words out of Jesus' mouth on the cross. I've always wondered if he didn't look right at this Roman centurion who had nailed him to the cross, right? I wonder if he looked right at him when he said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. Luke chapter 23 says this. It was now about noon, so Jesus has been on the cross for about 3 hours. It was about noon, and darkness came over the whole land until 3 p.m, for the sun had stopped shining, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two. I don't know if the centurion ever heard about the temple curtain, but man, when the sun stops shining and it gets dark at 3 p.m, you notice. So Jesus called out with a loud voice, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. And when he had said this, he breathed his last. So Jesus' first word and last word on the cross were Father. And this is significant because, again, he is on this cross because he claimed to be the Son of God. And that was something that people only said in Rome. They only said it about the emperor. They considered him to be God, or they considered him to be a son of God. And so for Jesus to make this claim, this, in their eyes, was worthy of punishment by death. And here he is, even up to the moment that he took his last breath, and he's crying out to God as his Father. This centurion, he knew there were some crazy people. He didn't know much about the Jewish religion, but he knew there were fanatics and crazy people. He knew there were riots. That's why they were in town, to keep the peace, right? But man, he'd never seen anybody like Jesus. And the Gospel of Mark, man, records one of the most simple but profound statements that anybody's ever made. And it was the same centurion that when Jesus drew his last breath, the centurion looked at him and said, surely he was the Son of God. He knew, and you know what it took? He just had to get close enough to Jesus to see it for himself. Now, I tell you that because, again, I don't know where you are today. I don't know what part of your life hurts. I don't know what's painful. I don't know what's falling apart, but I know this. I know that if you're in one of those seasons, then everything in you right now wants to run the other way. I know that everything in you says, why would I move closer to God when first of all, instinctually, I want to go that way, and second, I've prayed for breakthrough and God has not given me that. Why would I keep moving closer to him? I know one of you is there right now. Maybe many of you are there right now, okay? And what I want to just beg you to do today is, rather than run the other way, just take a step closer. Crawl if you have to. Let somebody be a shoulder for you to lean on so they can walk you closer to Jesus. Because what we learned from this centurion is, man, if you will just get close enough to Jesus, you will see for yourself that he is so much more than you ever imagined. He is so much more than you ever thought or ever dreamed of. And he will prove it to you. In fact, he proved it to you when he went to that cross, when they put Jesus on the cross, right? So who is Jesus? He is the perfect, sinless Son of God, who was sent to earth to live a perfect, sinless life. And he went to a cross to die in your place and my place, because the sin in my life and the sin in your life created a separation between you and God. And God said, I'm not gonna let that be. I'm gonna do anything and everything to erase that separation, to draw them close to me. So he sent Jesus, and he was killed in our place. And when he died, a perfect, sinless person dying an undeserving death, he paid the debt of your sin and my sin, so that we could be forgiven. And they laid him in a tomb, but we know that that tomb was just a borrowed cave in the ground. It was just a temporary tomb, because, man, 3 days later, he came out of that tomb and he is alive today, and you and I can have hope and life because he is risen. And what you need to know today is, whatever's painful in your life, whatever hurts, whatever is just shriveled up and dead and there's no life in it, man, don't give up on that, because you may be in a Saturday today, but guys, Sunday is coming. And Jesus is not done with you yet. If there is air in your lungs, there should be hope in your heart, because he is still working and he has a plan for you. And if you'll just get close enough, he'll show you, and you will see, man, he is so much more than you ever dreamt. So we're gonna take communion together. This is a time in our service every weekend where we remember the cross. And we're thankful for that, because And what Jesus went through for us is something that none of us we can't imagine the weight of that, right? So we're thankful for the cross, but we are thankful that it didn't end on the cross. We're thankful for that empty tomb, and we remember that every single week in this moment. But I want you to do this, okay? As we take communion together, would you just tell God that you're thankful for that? But then would you do this? Ask God right now. Maybe it's, God, I don't know how I'm even gonna do this, but would you just make that step clear? Would you just give me the strength to take that step, whatever that looks like? Maybe it's you're gonna open the Bible and you're gonna read it for the first time, not to get something from God, but just to seek him. Seek his presence in your life. Maybe it's, God, I'm gonna pray. I don't even know how. I don't know why. I don't know what it means. I don't know what to say, but guys, you don't need any fancy words or a formula. Just tell God what you're afraid of, or what you're frustrated with, or what you're worried about. Just tell him. And then ask him this. Maybe don't even ask him for a quick fix. Maybe you just say, God, would you give me the courage to just face today and the peace to know you're with me? Maybe that's your step. Maybe your step is you need to trust Jesus with your life for the first time. Whatever it is in this moment, pray for the courage to take that step, because if you will, I promise you this. If you will move one step closer to Jesus, he will not let that step be in vain, and he'll show you all over again. He sees your faith, he's amazed by it, and he is so much more. And he wants to do more in your life, immeasurably more than you could ask or imagine. Let me pray. God, thank you for your word, and thank you for the hope of the cross and the empty tomb. God, I pray right now for anybody who's listening, if they're feeling like something in their life is beyond repair, maybe that they failed one too many times and you've lost interest, or you moved on, or there's no hope. God, if they're struggling, wrestling with a faith that's dry and just dead and lifeless, I believe that you will breathe life into us again. So God, would you do that? Right now, we thank you for the cross and the empty tomb, God, and we help us to have courage to put our trust fully in you. And God, would you just make yourself real to us again? We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.